What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Who Wants to Brawl YouTube channel. That is not a question, that is a statement. My name is Who, and I'm letting you know I want to brawl. Here, we're all about the Magic format Brawl, specifically in regards to Magic Arena, so we don't have to worry about budget, we only have to worry about wildcards.
This episode is a new deck tech. On these episodes, I go over a new Brawl commander and walk you through my ideas and strategies of how best to build this commander. Our commander today is going to be Magda, Brazen Outlaw. This is a low-to-the-ground creature that encourages us to go wide with dwarves, rewarding us with a treasure token every time a dwarf becomes tapped, and then we can sacrifice 5 treasures to search our library for a dragon or an artifact card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle our library. With a card like this, we can have some pretty explosive turns depending on the artifact or dragon that we search up. So we're going to try to go wide with dwarves and then finish our opponent off with a couple of really big dragons. The first strategy we're going to talk about is some dwarves we want on the battlefield. Magda really gets going once you have dwarves, so the low-to-the-ground dwarves are really the gas that makes the engine of this deck go. So our first dwarf is Vault Robber, which is 2 mana for a 1/3, and for 1 mana and tapping it, we can exile a creature from our graveyard and create a treasure token. This synergizes perfectly, adding a token when it taps upon activation and upon resolution of the ability. Then we have Axgar Cavalier, which is 2 mana for a 2/2 that taps to give a creature haste. Again, it taps itself and then allows another dwarf, possibly Magda, to attack the turn it comes down and tap, giving us another treasure token. Torbrand, Thane of Redfell, is just a must in any mono red brawl deck. It adds 2 damage to any of our red sources, and it happens to come with the benefit of being a dwarf. Fearless Liberator is a 2/1 that can boast for 3 mana and create another 2/1 dwarf. Again, going wide with dwarves is a big reason the deck can function at all, and Fearless Liberator helps us get there. Rimrock Knight can be a nice combat trick when we need it to be, otherwise it's just a 2 mana 3/1 dwarf that's just efficient enough to make the deck. And arguably the best card in the deck, because it allows us to have 7 of them, is 7 Dwarves. It's 2 mana for a 2/2 that gets +1/+1 for each other card named 7 Dwarves, and we can have 7 of them in the deck. Without this card, there wouldn't be enough Dwarves in Brawl at the current moment to make this deck function, so this is the lifeblood of the deck. Our next strategy is going to be removal. It's generic for any Brawl deck, but it's an absolute must for any deck to function at a reasonable consistency. Our first removal spell is going to be Thundering Rebuke. It's just 2 mana to deal 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker. It's just an efficient removal spell. And then Fire Prophecy is a 2 mana instant that deals 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. But the most important part for this deck is arguably that we can put a card from our hand on bottom of our library and draw a card. That way, if there's a dragon or artifact we want to tutor for, we can put it on bottom of our library and then tutor for it with Magda's ability when the time is right. I've been pounding the drum for cards like this since they came out, and I'm going to continue, with Shredded Sails being a 2 mana instant that destroys an artifact, deals 4 damage to a creature with flying, or can cycle. That versatility is an absolute must in any Brawl deck. And then we have Embereth Shieldbreaker, which is 2 mana for a 2/1 knight, but it has an adventure that for 1 red can destroy an artifact. Tundra Fumarole is a 3 mana sorcery that deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker, but then it adds 1 colorless back into our mana pool for each snow mana spent to cast it. We have no reason not to run nothing but snow mountains, so this often gives us back 3 colorless mana. And then Demon Bolt is a 3 mana instant that deals 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker, but we can foretell it for 2, allowing us to only pay 1 for it at a later turn. And then Royal Eruption may not be the most efficient as a 2 mana sorcery that deals 3 damage to any target, but because we can kick it, and with this deck we often generate enough mana to be able to, that it can act as a nice removal spell and even finisher at times when we need it to. Our next strategy is going to be utility pieces. These are cards that may not necessarily be vital to the concept of the deck, but nonetheless make the deck run all the more smooth and are absolutely necessary to building a consistent deck. Our first utility piece is going to be Seize the Spoils. It is 2 and a red for a sorcery that, as an additional cost to cast it, discard a card, we draw 2 cards, and add a treasure token. This is essentially a more expensive Tormenting Voice, but I think that 1 extra mana for a treasure token is enough to make it worth running in this deck. I could be wrong and trying to overthink it, but every once in a while, through playtesting, that 1 treasure was enough to go search our library for a dragon or artifact, and therefore, I think it's worth it. And then as a 2-mana 2/2 with First Strike, Dragonkin Berserker is a nice efficient creature to play in the early game, and then has a nice mana sink with a boast ability of 4 and a red that we can make a 5/5 flying dragon with. Birgi, God of Storytelling is an interesting card in this deck. It's a 3-mana 3/3 that whenever we cast a spell, we add 1 red to our mana pool, and this allows us to have some explosive turns. But in the later game, when we're flooding out, we can play her as Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, which is a 5-mana artifact that we can discard a card, exile the top 2 cards of our library, and we can play those cards this turn. This essentially allows us to draw 2 cards, which once you're flooding out can be absolutely huge. Underworld Breach can fill a similar role as Harnfell, that if we're flooding out, we can cast cards from our graveyard, being a 2-mana enchantment that gives all cards in our graveyard escape, and we can escape them for their mana cost and exiling 3 cards. Dwarven Reinforcements is just an efficient token generator that gives us 2 dwarfs, either for 4 mana straight up, or we can foretell it for 2 and then pay 2 mana at a later turn to get those tokens. And then Crashing Drawbridge can tap to give our creatures haste until end of turn, allowing our dwarves to attack the turn they come down, getting that ever valuable tap to give us a treasure token. And then Heraldic Banner is a 3-mana artifact that when it comes down, we choose a color. It gives all creatures we control of that color +1/+0 and taps for that color. So I don't think I need to actually say this, but we're always going to choose red, and this gives our dwarves a little bit extra punch on the attack. And then Funeral Longboat, Thundering Chariot, and Gilded Assault Cart are all vehicles that once they're on the battlefield, they allow us to tap our dwarves immediately as soon as our dwarf comes down, giving us a treasure token a turn earlier. But now it's time to talk about the meat of the deck, the artifacts and dragons we're going to search for. First up, there's Terror of the Peaks, which is 5 mana for a 5/4. That the most important part of the card for our deck is that whenever another creature enters the battlefield, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. Having this on the battlefield and then tutoring up for dragons can be absolutely devastating. And then we have Opportunistic Dragon, which is 4 mana for a 4/3 flyer that when it enters the battlefield, we can take a human or artifact from our opponent. It loses all abilities and can't attack or block, but it gets a blocker out of the way or it gets a nasty artifact to no longer be a threat. And to be able to tutor this up at instant speed with 5 treasures is enough to make this an absolute steal in this deck. And then there's a perfect synergy card with Goldspan Dragon, which is 5 mana for a 4/4 flying haste that whenever it attacks or is targeted, we create a treasure token, and then it lets our treasures, whether they're created by the Goldspan Dragon or by Magda, have tap, sack, and add 2 mana of any one color to our mana pool instead of just 1 mana. Essentially doubling the value of our treasures. And then Leyline Tyrant is a 4 mana 4/4 flyer that says red mana doesn't empty from our mana pool as steps and phases end, and then when it dies we can pay any amount of red mana, and then it deals damage equal to the amount spent to any target. With all the treasures we have lying around in this deck, sometimes this can get out of control really quickly. As for artifacts we can search up, we primarily have 2. First up, we have Maskwood Nexus, which is a 4 mana artifact which gives creatures we control, creatures that aren't on the battlefield, and our creature spells Changeling, which means they have every creature type, which means even our dragon and our utility creatures now become dwarves. And then for 3 mana and tapping it, we can pump out a 2/2 blue shapeshifter with Changeling. And it's always nice to be able to tutor up one of the best equipment Magic has ever printed in Embercleave. For those that don't know, it's an equipment that says equipped creature gets +1/+1, trample, and double strike, When it enters the battlefield, we attach it to a creature, and it costs 1 less for each attacking creature we control. So going wide with dwarves means we either attack with a lot of dwarves and can cast this from our hand, or we can tutor it up after blockers are declared to have an absolute blowout. And speaking of Double Strike, the card that might have the claim for the best card in the deck is Terror of Mount Velas, which is 7 mana for a 5/5 flying Double Strike, but when it enters the battlefield, creatures we control gain Double Strike. Being able to tutor this onto the battlefield at instant speed allows for some absolutely silly, back-breaking blowout. And if our opponents don't have the right board state or don't declare blockers the right way, this can even win the game on the spot. The land for this deck is pretty simple. We have 20 snow-covered mountains. We have Castle Embreth, which enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a mountain. And then for 3 mana and tapping it, we can give all of our creatures +1/+0. We tend to be going wide anyway, so this is a nice payoff. And then we have Dwarven Mine, which is a mountain itself, but enters the battlefield tapped unless we control 3 or more other mountains. And if it enters the battlefield untapped, we get a dwarf. You can't ask for a land that synergizes with your commander any better than this. I promise you, they pretty much don't exist. And now, to end this video, here is an absolutely ridiculous emote war I got into with an opponent. I hope you enjoy it. And that does it for this video. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Share with a friend to help the channel grow. Hit that bell icon to make sure you get notifications about new videos to make sure you don't miss anything. I also want to give a shout out to my buddy Rob Slota for making the Who Wants to Brawl logo. He's a tattoo artist, and you can check out his Instagram by following the link in the show notes below. You can email me at whowantstobrawl@gmail.com. My Twitter is @brawlwho. I also stream on Magic Arena at twitch.tv/whowantstobrawl. Check me out on Sundays at 11 in the morning, where I stream last week or next week's deck tech. On Mondays, I stream random decks. Sometimes I do Brawl, sometimes I'll even throw in a draft. I also stream a random day of the week, or at least I try to. This is Random Games. Follow me on Twitter, and I'll let you know when I'm going to play ahead of time and what I'm going to play ahead of time. But for now, this is Who letting you know I no longer want to brawl. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.